Okay, good morning. Start by thanking Bogdana and Dusan for inviting me to this prestigious and important conference. It's very interesting to follow Peter's excellent talk on video games because the kind of language or linguistics that I'll be talking about this morning is very much the kind of linguistic and semiotic pragmatic analysis that is kind of relevant to the issues that he was talking about. Of course, there is research in semiotics of video games. And it's also interesting that video games involve national stereotypes, which is another subject that is studied in social sciences. I won't be talking so much about stereotypes, but more about the way that media, mass media in particular, influence us. And of course, again, this follows on from Peter's talk. Well, so the ideas about Russia, about Russians, and of course Russian ideas about the West go back to, at least in recent times, to the Cold War. During the Second World War, interestingly enough, Russia was very positively valued in Britain. There were a lot of patriotic hymns celebrating Russian heroes and their deeds. But this has changed, and during the Cold War, the positioning of Russia as the global enemy became more prevalent. And so during that period, the Cold War period, which was for most of us here, our formative years, so the images of each other, the two blocks had of each other, were conditioned heavily by the mass media rather than by personal experience. It's very interesting at a popular level, also in the conference in Serbia, in Belgrade, which we've just all participated in. It wasn't mentioned, but it was something that came into my mind that during the years of the World Cup, when the World Cup was held in Russia, at a popular level, there were a lot of stories about how wonderful Russian people were, how helpful they were, how friendly they were. So at a personal level, these kind of contacts create positive impressions. But in the mass media, of course, the predominant note is that of fear. So what are the press? Here, when I'm talking about the press, I'm talking about newspapers. And I think the above statement is true. You may not believe it, but I do think that most Western journalists still believe that what they're doing is telling us in an objective way what is happening in the world, okay? This is a position which has been contested by media research, people like White, who say that actually it's value-laden and ultimately ideological. It's a social force that acts to support the interests of economic and political elites. And by the public, it's seen as inaccurate, commercialized, sensationalist, and biased. A very influential modern critique of the press is that by Chomsky and Herman. I'm sure some of you will know this book, Manufacturing Consent. And Chomsky and Herman say that it's been recognized for many years that the manufacture of consent is a major task in societies where obedience cannot be ensured by violence. The pretended objectivity and neutrality of news reporting masks presuppositions and ideological principles that should be challenged. And this is very much the perspective of the talk that I'll be giving. So here, an example right away, and I'll be talking about the Skripal case, which I'm sure you remember, despite the pandemic, despite the war, despite all these situations. This was an international flashpoint of relations between Britain and Russia in 2018. And this is a headline. So Putin personally ordered attack on spy, says UK. Okay? So this is the newspaper telling us what's going on in the world. Its so-called objective function. But if you look at it, your takeaway from this is that Putin did order this attack. Okay? This is what you take away at a cognitive level. Your mind doesn't go through all the steps of saying, hang on, what does it actually mean? Who said it? The UK. How could the UK doesn't speak? The UK. There are levels when we start to analyze press discourse that are extremely revealing. This is another one. I'll also be saying more about this case. This is The Guardian. This is a supposedly objective, left-wing, progressive, the only free newspaper available on the web. Skripal poisoning suspects received mystery phone call following the attack, okay? So again, we have the images, the faces, and I'll be saying more about that, the persuasive force of this. When you look at that, you think, these are the guilty people, they did it, and there's no more doubt. That's the message that you're taking in. And in fact, all that happened in this article, as I'll show later, I'll talk about it later, is that the secret services, the British secret services, released to the Guardian newspaper a detail, and the detail was that these two people received a phone call on the day that they came back from Salisbury, okay? So if they were tourists and they got a phone call from their mother telling them that they hadn't forgotten to pack their towels or whatever, that would have been the same content. In this content, it's all cloak and dagger. They're the guilty people, and they're doing it. And this is the supposedly objective, supposedly progressive left-wing Guardian that's doing this. But I'll come back to that story in due course. John Simpson. Some of you may have seen this. It's on YouTube. It's John Simpson, the famous BBC journalist, and he's haranguing Vladimir Putin with this idea that you're launching. We believe that it's you who are launching a new Cold War, standing up to power, speaking the truth to power. And Putin takes his trousers down. He takes them to school, and he just absolutely demolishes this kind of pretentious question. He points out all the realities of NATO, American bases, NATO encroachment, and all this. And was it we who did this? Was it we who did? So Putin takes him to task. But how impartial and objective is that question? And how far is it full of an ideological leaning? In some of the research that I've done with Tatiana Lerina and Vladimir Ozyumenko from Ruden University regard this phenomenon, this linguistic phenomenon of ambiguity. And as linguists, this is our interest, our special area of interest. It's the way that you can use features like here, indefinite pronouns, epistemic modality, passive voice, present perfect tense, interrogative headlines, and so on. And these construe textual ambiguity. I'll be saying a few words in explanation of these terms. Example, Russia has refused to explain how Novichok was used to strike down the Skripals on March the 4th, okay? So this is an example of what we call presupposition, okay? So texts can assume that something is true, and then they're written, and the reader doesn't have the time to process it, to think, wait a moment, is that true or is that not true? It's a kind of sleight of hand. It's a trick that the journalists use. So presupposition, Levinson, 83, says it contains a debatable proposition assumed to be true. So what is the debatable proposition in this sentence here? That Russia knows, yeah? That Russia knows. If Russia doesn't know, then it can't explain, yeah? So we assume the truth of something, and then we print it. To allege, this is a verbal choice, okay? So when we find a verbal choice, it means to say that someone has done something illegally or wrong without giving proof. So there's no proof. That's what it means to allege. I say that you did something, and that's the verb means that. To allege means that. And this allege is used all the time in newspaper discourse. UK alleges Russia previously tested door handle attack, yeah? The Skripals have been in Russia's sights for some time. Also alleged again, the UK. The UK is very busy doing things which are alleging here. And there's no proof is given, and no proof is required in a newspaper article. It's infotainment. You're reading it just to pass the time. And so you don't have, it's not being produced in a court of law. To claim is very similar. And again, to claim is used all the time. in press discourse. To say that something is true or is a fact, although you can't prove it. Boris Johnson claims Putin ordered nerve attack, okay? Very similar semantics are going on here. Epistemic modality, again, if the linguists among you will know what this is, but for some others I'll explain. Epistemic modality indicates certainty. So if I'm certain that something happens or that something exists, I don't use any modality. I say, I am in a room. Yeah, I don't say I may be in a room. I say I am in a room. So when you use epistemic modality, you indicate that something may not be true. Yeah, it may not be true, but it's your attitude to it. So again, why Putin may have engineered the gruesome calling card. Again, Russia's plotting attack that could kill thousands. Again, there's uncertainty, there's ambiguity. Interrogative headline, look at this first one. Why would Putin want to nuke Florida? It's incredible, but this is the kind of things that we have in Western media. Why would Putin want to nuke Florida? It's a good question. It's a question. It makes you think. Now let me think. Why would Putin want to nuke Florida? Let me think. But you don't think. Actually, he probably doesn't. You don't think that because it's not grammatically determined. What is grammatically determined when you have a question is to look for an answer. Okay? Let me think. Well, he might do this, he might do that. So again, these interrogative headlines are another means for construing linguistic ambiguity. And this is press research. Repeated exposure to assertions for which there's no evidence increases the likelihood that people will believe those assertions. So let's think a little bit about the Skripal case, which was 5 years ago. I haven't forgotten it, though maybe some of you will. This was two Russian people who were attacked with this substance that was called Novichok, and they were attacked in a park in Salisbury in England in 2018. And he had all kinds of strange connections with the Russian Secret Service. We really, it's a very extremely complicated human drama, and the truth, I think, still hasn't emerged about what happened and why to the Skripals. But this is 1 week after the attack, which was on the 4th of March. Theresa May comes out and tells the House of Commons, the British House of Commons, she's the Prime Minister, she says there are only two plausible explanations for what happened in Salisbury. Either this was a direct attack, a direct act by the Russian state against our country, or a Russian government lost control of its potentially catastrophic, damaging nerve agent, allowing it to get into the hands of others. This is an official statement of what happened. So how she knew that, we don't know, because it didn't come out. It's never emerged how Theresa May knew this, on what basis. But she's asserting it. She's boldly asserting it. So again, we're feeding into this current of Russophobia that is beginning to circulate in the press. So in 2018, I happened to be in Glasgow, in the UK, in Scotland. And I thought, well, okay, so there's all this anti-Russian propaganda coming out in the media, in the press. Why don't I go around and ask people what they think of it, okay? So I went to a shopping centre in Glasgow. I got thrown out of the shopping centre. Once they found out what I was doing, they threw me out of the shopping centre. But I was asking, what's your general opinion of Russia and Russians? How do you get your ideas? Where do you get your ideas from about Russia and Russians? And crucially, I think this idea about, do the British government, are they telling the truth about what happened in Salisbury? And why not? What do you think happened? Do you think President Putin personally ordered the operation? Because as I've shown, as we've seen, this is something that the press were really keen to push from the beginning, that it was Putin. It wasn't just the Russians, it was him. And he may have done, for all I know, but I mean, it certainly hasn't come out. So here are a few answers. Some people say yes, I think they are. I definitely think it was Russians. That's what Scottish people say when they mean yes. They say I. My answer has to be yes, I do. I don't trust the British government anyway. And this, the fantastic one was this Racine guy, so again, not very English name, not very Scottish name, but he's saying that it's a failed MI5 hit, which was really interesting. I had a long conversation with him about it. And it seemed to me that that was totally ridiculous as the claim that it was Putin, but never mind. So these were a few answers about the whole thing. But what I was interested in is that when you say something, when you give your opinion about what's happening in the world, you don't just say, this is what I think. You say, this is what I think, and here is why I think it. So you tell me, because you don't want to look an idiot, so you want to give good reasons for having the views that you do. So Putin personally ordered the attack. There's a personal opinion. There's this visual evidence. There's this unspecified evidence that that guy adds. But of course, this evidence, this so-called evidence, is what we're getting from media. What happens in the world? We really have absolutely no idea. Even if you see it in front of your eyes on television, it could just be coming from a television studio somewhere, like the moon landings, which never happened, apparently. Again, another example here. What factors form your ideas about Russia? Newspaper, books, press, what you read in the press. Again, we're having the idea that Russians are bad because they do these bad things. But it all comes ultimately from media, from the press. And here is the example from the Guardian newspaper, which you can see here from what's the highlighted expressions. These are all expressions that express ambiguity. They're ambiguity. The text is riddled with ambiguity. The Russian men suspected of poisoning, raising the possibility that a backup team. One theory, a theory is just it's my theory, but it could be right, it could be wrong. The detectives would not be drawn on any specifics. Yeah. So we're not going to tell you anything specific. It is understood. It is understood is passive. Okay, and in using the passive, you don't have to say who is doing that action. Yeah. So it is understood by whom? By journalists, by Secret Service people, by Boris Johnson. We don't know. Which suggests, and again, suggests is ambiguous, and may is our epistemic modality. Okay, so basically, this whole story, there really is no story other than, as I mentioned at the beginning, that these two men, on their way back from Salisbury, who may have been completely innocent tourists, okay, they may have been, they received a telephone call. That is the truth. That is the truth, and the rest is insinuation. Okay. So you can look at it, you can analyze it in this way. What is true? What is true that they received a phone call? They returned to London, and the Scotland Yard is inquiring. This is the truth that lies behind this newspaper story, and the rest is speculation. Okay, as I've indicated, the various linguistic means that we have of construing these things. So. Again, I'm concluding how much of the story rests on facts, as you can see. Not very much. And this is not untypical of reporting. That's the point I'm making, that this is, if you drill down into most press reports, you'll find that they have similar kinds of approaches to the truth. So basically, I'm going to say that this is what newspapers do. They repeat stories by prominent people. They push opinions that reflect the views of government when they're not multinationals and so on. They produce stories which consist of opinions, views and suggestions and insinuations rather than objective, disinterested, neutral or factual material. The implicit arguments advanced by interviewees rely on press sources for backing, and our views of the wider world depend on what we read in the papers or see on TV, and that's true of all of us, unfortunately. Okay, so we may know something about our immediate environments, the people who surround us. But as soon as you start saying, what's going on in the Ukraine, what's going on, what do you think happened here or there, you're relying on media. and newspapers for your information, unless you happen to be there. So don't believe what you read is still true, as true today as it was 40 years ago when I was coming up. And here are some publications which I've done by myself and in collaboration with Larina and Ozyumenko. And if anybody's interested, I'll happily send them these. They're different linguistic studies of various aspects of media reporting on Russia, media representations of, especially of Russia. So thank you very much for your attention. Your